So today we're in the Almost Aviation backup cockpit, and that's because we're going to take a look at the modified Saitek Yoke. We're going to take it up, fly it around, see how it compares. We're going to be flying the ACA Decathlon from Real Air. So this is a nippy little aircraft. It should give us something of a feel for how this Yoke flies. And let's see how we get on. So we're just going to take a short hop across the bay and see how this thing performs. We're taking off in a bit of a crosswind here, and we're going to try and get there before it gets dark. It's probably worth reviewing what we've done to this yoke to try and sort it out. The main thing we've done, of course, is to completely ditch the original elevator action. So we're going to completely lose that stickiness that's characteristic of this yoke, or at least any stickiness that we encounter is going to be down to the new mechanism that we've put in there. It can't be anything to do with the original mechanism. Hopefully those runners that we've used are going to give us a much smoother action. In the process they're going to completely remove that central detente or notch in the elevator action. Maybe we'll say a bit more about that as we go on, but it's going to give us a smooth lock-to-lock action on the elevators. Incidentally, since I made the original video showing the construction of this modification, I've also chosen to remove the aileron spring. The aileron action, although I thought it was going to be acceptable, it was really shown up by the smoothness of the new elevator action. So in practice it was letting the yoke down. So I've taken that out as well. Although the yoke still uses the same mechanism to operate the aileron potentiometer, I've now added an external spring mechanism using the same kind of bungee cords that I've used for the elevator return action. So we're checking that out at the same time. We should have again we get rid of that central detente as well, and hopefully a smoother action all around. So what we should find is that we should have overall much more of a smooth feel and finer, more precise control, and that's important in a number of situations, particularly in turns. We're going to look at turns in a little while, and also in the flare, operating things through the flare. Particularly, across the board here we're talking about the elevator mechanism. That's the one that's much more problematic. Now, I had worried while constructing this modification at the amount of, I suppose, rocking. This kind of rocking motion is down to play in the runners that I've used to provide the elevator action. Although they felt fairly tight, and I took pains to make the mounting of these as precise as I could, there's still quite a lot of side-to-side play in evidence. And when I was assembling this, I almost gave up because I thought that the action was going to be too sloppy. But then actually I tried it out, and in practice, although you can feel that side-to-side rocking motion, it's actually not too obtrusive at all in operation. And in fact what you find is in the basic Saitek yoke, like the CH Eclipse yoke, I have to say, you do get some side-to-side flexing anyway, and that's, I think, down to the fact that in each case the handle's plastic, and that's quite flexible in itself. But you have that said, there's no denying that if you compare it to something upmarket like my Elite yoke, it is very different. The Elite yoke is rock solid. There's absolutely no side-to-side flex at all. Everything's metal, everything's sturdy and well constructed. But it's not a problem. It's certainly not a problem so far. We're just coming up on the airport, and I have to say, so far the experience of flying this yoke's pretty good. It's pretty smooth. The aileron action is comfortably precise. It returns to the centre fairly accurately. Now there is one of the things about this yoke that annoys people is that in each axis there's a central, now this is irrespective of the notch or the detente, there's a central null zone. This is independent of the one that you can set up in FSX or in FSU IPC if you use that. If you look at the calibration screen on Windows game controller settings, you'll discover there's a flat spot that you can't get rid of. And so we still have that, talking about the ailerons, we still have that in the aileron axis. So what you should see is I'm just slowing down here. I've chopped the power, and I'm just pulling the nose up, letting the speed bleed off, and adjusting the trim so we can start to turn towards the airport and begin our approach. I don't know how well you're going to see this on the video. Making a turn like this, I'm getting the feeling that I'm having to pull back too much on the yoke Obviously one of the things that's important in the turn, and one of the things that was a real pain with the Saitek yoke out of the box, is that holding the yoke back subtly in turns, particularly in shallow turns, is kind of difficult to do because you've got to be rocking backwards and forwards in and out of that central notch. So that's one of the things that we've immediately got an improvement in, but what I'm finding is I'm having to hold back significantly, it feels like significantly more than I'm expecting to have to in the turns. And thinking about it, that makes sense. Makes sense for two reasons. One of the reasons is, just like we talked about with the aileron mechanism, we have a null zone that's, if you like, hard-coded into the elevator actions. Again, if you look at this in the Windows game controller settings page, particularly if you go to the calibration screen where it lets you show the numeric data, you'll see there's a fairly significant flat spot that you can't get rid of, right in the middle of the range. Now I think what's made it worse for me in having modified my yoke is that you may recall, if you watched the previous video, I lengthened the crank arm that operates the elevator potentiometer. I didn't lengthen it by very much, but I did lengthen it, and that is significant because the stroke required in order to move that through the same arc, if you like, to clear one side of that null zone to the other has increased, and it feels like it's increased quite a lot. And in fact I've measured what that null zone amounts to in physical terms, movement of the yoke in other words, and it's about a centimetre, 12 millimetres even. That's half an inch, old money, which is really too much. Remembering the overall travel of this yoke is something a little bit less than 10 centimetres, 4 inches. And so I think that's what the problem is. So this flat spot in the pitch axis of the Saitek yoke is really a pain, and it's something that makes this, in spite of the modifications we've done, it makes it really quite unsatisfactory to fly around. And this is a common criticism that you'll read a lot about if you go looking for comments on the Saitek yoke. There is a certain logic to why they've done that, given that we have on the original yoke we have these notches at the centre of both the pitch and the roll axes. There's an acknowledgement that actually getting fine control around those notches is not possible, so what they've done is they've slapped this is my reasoning, they've slapped this non-negotiable null zone on there. Now it's not clear to me why they couldn't have left that alone, given us the full range of travel, because FSX allows us to set a null zone in software, and of course if you use FSU IPC you can do it there as well, slightly more flexibly. But they have done that, and there's nothing we can do by tweaking the yoke. We have to do something, again, I guess somewhat radical to get over this problem. And I have done that. What I've done is I've actually gone inside the box once more and I've disconnected the pitch axis potentiometer. And I've reconnected that to some very long wires that come out of the box. And then I've taken something else. I hope I can show you this. I've taken my Logitech 3D Pro joystick controller. I've opened this up, and what you find if you've got one of these is you can disconnect the potentiometers quite easily. They're connected by little plugs, little 3-pin plugs, and you can just pull these off. And so what you can do is you can plug the wires from the Saitek potentiometer into the controller board for the Logitech 3D Pro, and I've done that. You can see a little tail, I hope you can see, coming out here from one of the pots, and that restores the full range of travel. Now obviously when you get to this point in the game, you know, it's becoming quite clear that the remnants of the original Saitek yoke are dwindling. At the moment we're hanging onto the aileron potentiometer and the box and the handle. Well, and not to play it down too much, we've still got all the switch gear. A more satisfactory way of doing this, if you haven't got a Logitech 3D Pro or you don't want to pull your joystick apart, you can buy something like the Leo Bodner board. If you buy the one with the analog axes on, you can do exactly the same thing, and you could plug all the buttons into that as well, so you could completely junk the controller board inside the Saitek unit. But of course once you get to this stage and looking at all the mechanical modifications we've made, you begin to realise you could actually build your own joystick or your own yoke from scratch, and it would be a lot better than the stock Saitek unit, with the possible exception of the handle. The handle is, I mean, it's plasticky and it's light, but it's, you know, it looks nice and it does the job. It's reasonably ergonomic. But you might want to think about building one of these from scratch. Anyway, we're not doing that today. We've made yet another modification. We've got to plug this in and see how that one handles. Okay, so here we are again with the modified setup. You should see I've got a much smoother range of motion here. I've set up a bit of a null zone in the elevator action in FSX in the controls dialog, but we're getting a full, nicely proportional movement of the elevator control now. So we're just going to take it round the block and repeat that landing really. We've reduced the crosswind slightly because it was a little bit out of proportion. We'll see how we get on. Holding the nose forward until the tail comes up, then we're just pulling it off. We're not going to do a full circuit here, we're just going to go out over the bay, around the ship and bring it back and put it down. So again, we're looking out for how much we have to hold back in the turns. We're going to do a couple of fairly brisk turns here to hook us back round. So we'll just go around the VOR, put it back down. We're going to be putting it down on one wheel again because we've got that crosswind, and that's really the most critical phase of flight, where this whole business with the elevator notching and also the flat spot really gets in the way. So hopefully we've eliminated that and we're going to have as much finesse as we need throughout the flare. We'll try and get a look at the control surfaces as well as the control inputs. Hooking it round here, really having to hold back to maintain the height in the turn. And you can see we're still way too high, so we've got to dump some. We'll just hook it around one more time, then we're probably going to give it a boot of cross controls to dump a bit of height. We've still got that slight notching in the aileron axis, but we're not too bothered about that. So here we are, just losing a bit of height again. Then we're going to set it up in a bit of a crab. And we're going to start to hook it around with the rudder, drop the left wing, and we're just going to try and hold it off. So hopefully you can just see these really small subtle adjustments throughout the flare with the elevator control, and then just touching it down on one wheel there. Beautifully smooth. So there we have it, the Saitek Yoke made flyable. Is it worth doing? Well, if you've got one of these and you want to make the most of it, then yes, it's definitely worth doing. The end result certainly is a very flyable, usable product. If I'd done this a long time ago, I may not have spent money on anything other than the Saitek Yoke. If you want to buy one of these second hand and have a go at it, and if you like fiddling, then by all means have a go. Certainly I would recommend that you make arrangements to get an alternative controller board, because you really do need to eliminate that flat spot. And really, if you're going to buy one of those for the sole purpose of fixing this yoke, you know, you may as well go out and buy a more expensive yoke, I guess is the bottom line. But at the end of the day, we've got something much better than we started off with, and I'd be quite happy to fly this around as my main flight yoke.